Hey guys. Okay, welcome back to another integrative theory. This one is called morphogenesis. It is a theory that was proposed by a theorist named Margaret Archer, really in response to Anthony Giddens' theory of structuration. Um, she was she agrees with a lot of it. This whole theory is going to be kind of based on a reaction to it, but at the base she agrees with a lot of it, with the idea that people create structures, and structures in turn create people. What she didn't like, there were two main issues with Giddens' theory of structuration that she didn't like. If you remember, we ended structuration with the idea of duality, the idea that agency and structure are two sides of the same coin. They're not really separable. And this idea she did not like. And the reason she didn't like it was not philosophically. Philosophically, she said, you know, if that's reality, that's fine. But in terms of being an analyst of society, it kind of paralyzes you. If you consider two things as two sides of the same coin, it's hard to attribute causality to either one of them. They just sort of both exist. And that struck her as being something that was going to limit the ability of people who are trying to use the theory to make, positive changes. It's going to limit their ability to do that. So she didn't like the idea of duality. She believed structure and agency were interrelated, but didn't want them to be thought of as two sides of the same coin. So we'll deal with that in just a moment. The second thing is that while she agreed that people have agency, she also said, in our everyday experience, it doesn't feel like we just walk into society and act according to our agency. It feels like we're a lot more constrained than that. Now, Giddens did talk about the fact that we were constrained by it, but he also really emphasizes the agency part. And Margaret Archer thought that maybe too much emphasis was put on that. So, in order to deal with those two core problems, she comes up with a theory called morphogenesis. The morpho part is going to be, so this part is going to be an acknowledgement that society doesn't have any preset form. Depending on the people involved, it could morph in lots of different ways. So morpho is the idea that there is no society could take any form. The genesis part is the idea that it is formed by agents. So what will happen is it could take any form, but it is going to be moved along toward whatever form it ends up being by those human agents. So that's morphogenesis. It could take any form. It will end up taking some form, but that form will depend on the people who are involved in forming it. Really importantly, and I'll get to this also in a moment, is the idea that the form society takes is going to change over time. Because it's not like just people set up society once and then it's set. Over the course of time, this whole idea of morphogenesis just kind of keeps occurring. It could take any form. The society that we're in right now could take any form 10 or 20 years from now, and she would say it will depend on the actions of the agents within it. Okay, so that gets us morphogenesis. So now let's talk about it in general. Everything takes form over time, and by everything, this is a really important idea for her. The entire system takes form over time, and that kind of makes intuitive sense. But she also talks about the fact that organizations are formed over time as well. But even us, the actors, take form over time. Even our own personal identities and motivations are formed over time. And again, they are all formed by the people who are enacting or creating society. So when she talks about society being created over time, she means every level of it. The macro level of our division of labor, of capitalism, of the collective consciousness, all of that but also the very, very micro level. We are being formed through this process of morphogenesis as well. So everything, you want to break that down, not just like in your notes. Don't just leave it at that. Use those examples. Capitalism at the very macro level, organizations at the meso or middle level, and then me as an individual and my identity and my motivation, the things that are going on in my head. She says these things are formed in the process of morphogenesis as well. Different time scales. I kind of alluded to this a little bit ago. We like you can probably be aware of this actually in your own life, how your identity has changed over time in the process of interacting with people. Your motivations change over time. And so when she says different time scales, what she means is up at the macro level, things change really slowly, but down here at the micro level, your and my individual lives, things change a lot faster. It's not that it's necessarily day by day or anything, but over the course of the 20 or so years that you've been alive, you've probably changed your identity a couple of times. You've probably changed your motivations and what you're interested in multiple times as well. But society on the whole has been kind of consistent, or if it's changing at a much more glacial pace. That's what she means by different time scales. This is something that's made possible by breaking away from Giddens' duality. In his duality, where you've got the macro level and the micro level attached to each other, it's hard to see how those things would change not in lockstep with each other. But by her saying, yes, they're interrelated, but they're not two sides of the same coin, it adds a degree of reality. I mean, it corresponds more closely to the reality that we live in or that we experience, where my identity and my motivations change much more quickly than the macro level or organizational level of society. Okay, so that, I think, gets us through the general stuff. This is morphogenesis generally, kind of her general deviations from what Giddens said. But then we're going to get over here to some details. And the details are things that are, I don't want to say bigger discrepancies between what she says and structuration, but I guess just more detailed ones. So first of all, she says you have to account for culture. Culture is a word that we didn't really talk a whole lot about when we were talking about Giddens' structuration. Culture being the system of meanings that exist for people. She says you can't just pay attention to the social practices that people are involved in, because it makes a difference whether you live in a society that is egalitarian or a society that is sexist and racist in terms of how much access people are going to have to certain social practices, like particular types of jobs, for example. So she says a real system that integrates the micro level and the macro level is going to have to pay attention to the idea of culture, that it's not just a bunch of individuals stepping into society and creating structures. It's men, it's white men and black men and brown men and white and black and brown women and LGBTQ people and all of those differences that and this is an important thing. My actual biology doesn't matter. It's the fact that we attach different meaning to maleness and femaleness, to whiteness and blackness. That's the thing that matters. Okay, and that leads us right into the next thing. Once you account for culture, once you decide we're going to be paying attention to that, then what you see is the different structures can be set up. The different structures in society can be set up to produce inequalities. For example, right now in America, when I'm giving this, recording this, which is the year 2021, Women are effectively punished for taking maternity leave because we've set up a society that, one, expects more parenting from women than, or from mothers than from fathers. That isn't a necessary thing to have happen. We could just as easily expect men to be to be taking care of kids equally. But right now in America, it is much more likely that a woman is going to take time off work to deal with children than a man is going to be. So that idea, which again comes from the culture, it's not biologically necessary after obviously the birth. That's a cultural idea. And if you live in a society that also culturally, sorry, I've lost where I was in my script, that also rewards people for not leaving work early or for being able to stay at work late. Well, if you live in a society that does that, and you have also live in a society that expects more from women around taking care of kids, you're setting up a society where women are going to be economically punished relative to men. So Margaret Archer talks about the fact that once we include culture in our idea of society, and Archer is one of the big theorists who gets us to start in the 1980s to really start valuing the culture as an independent variable, as I just kind of demonstrated to you. Once we start including that, then this idea of humans engaging in structuration, which I don't mean to like beat up on Anthony Giddens right now because what he came up with was pretty great, but it isn't a real accurate idea of social reality. There is no gender or race in his theory. And once you take culture into account, then you realize his theory doesn't describe reality all that well. It describes kind of, it's an abstraction away from reality. In order to get closer to reality, we need to include culture and the idea that not everybody is going to have the same ability to create the social structure that Anthony Giddens' theory kind of suggests is possible. Okay, I think that is it. Oh, last point. So we ended with duality with Giddens. Archer's term, and I apologize because it's almost the exact same word, but it means something very different. Her idea is dualism. Dualism is the idea that the concepts are intertwined, so there is dualness in it, but they are distinct. It is not agency and structure together like this. For her, it is agency, then structure. Actually, it starts out with structure because we all walk into a world that already has a structure. And then our agency, we then use our agency to, kind of try to accomplish our lives. And in the process, we create a new structure. And then we walk into that new structure and try to create our own lives again. And so these two things are intertwined, but they're not happening. It's more sequential than simultaneous. I didn't write that down in my notes, but that was a pretty good way of thinking about it. Okay. That's it. That's it for morphogenesis. In the next one, we're going to take another look at this sort of dialectical this, then that, then this, then that, with Pierre Bourdieu and his theory of habitus and field. So I'll talk to you in that video.